everybody. I know you're feeling it. You know, he says it's like I talked to Sirota. He's feeling like we're all feeling this thing where like we've been telling you.
Yeah.
We told you this was going to happen. You know, we are, and I know that can be alienating, and I know, and it's like, and we're supposed to be better than that, but just sometimes it just makes your head want to fucking explode. Because like, how many times do your friends on the left have to tell you how things are going to go before you're going to go, maybe we should jump on that bandwagon before they're right? You know?
Friends on the left. They don't have friends on the left. They have too hard, too real. What is it? Sorry.
It's too hard, too real.
Too raw, too real.
Too raw, too real.
Yeah, too raw, too real is like a porn star.
And I don't know what it was.
Like a porn star.
Actually, you're right. Too raw, too real sounds like a porn star too. You're right.
Too real, yeah. But I was just like, and people had kept, you know, for especially the last 6 months, you know, people would continue to talk about the West Wing thing. So I just posted something out. What is it? You know, I was like, hey, here's 271 hours of I fucking told you so. Because you listen to the show and, you know, and it's not like, I mean, here's what's crazy to me. My favorite one that people were like, whoa, you got that one right. When Jeffrey Epstein got arrested, Dave and I talked about like whether or not he'd even be alive by the time this episode dropped. And people were like, how did you see that coming?
But this is so important. How did you see that coming? Because, and T, I was texting you a little bit about this a couple days ago because I was listening to your latest episode of Champagne Sharks, and you had a guest who was talking about, you know, various researchers and writers who have done deep dives into various conservative, right-wing, however you want to frame it, communities, and tried to, in good faith, provide the sort of narrative story that is driving their politics. And whereas liberals have their own sort of version of what's going on with the right, oftentimes it is more about, and interrupt me and correct me if I'm mischaracterizing this, but more about shoring up our own view or liberals' own view of what's driving conservatives to quote unquote vote against their interests, instead of like kind of telling it in a way that sincerely engages with it and understands why it's appealing.
Yeah, and kind of captures how they see themselves.
Right. And I was struck by that episode in part because it reminded me of the gap between liberals and the left with respect to our own sort of internal narrative and ideological coherence when we tell our own stories, and how it was foregrounded for me when I watched Hassan Piker on Pod Save America a month or so ago, whenever that was, and how every word that came out of Hassan Piker's mouth was tied into our understanding of the world. Money negatively influencing politics, elected politicians not being willing to run on demonstrably popular issues, you know, like all of it tying into this like cohesive narrative. Every fact that drops down locks back in. Gaza, America first, wanting to spend domestically instead of overseas, all of these things. And John Lovitz in response was just kind of lobbing random reactionary bombs, you know, but what about these culture issues, and what about this, and what about that? And nothing, if you go back and listen to that episode, none of the things that John Lovitz brought up like really relate to each other and tie together to a story. It's more like, Republicans are wrong, inflation isn't our fault, and Republicans are wrong, immigrants aren't really bad, which, you know, I agree with, you know, but they don't have a narrative story.
Yeah, they can't tie them all together.
Yeah, and also I think it's just like not true. Like it's just gaslighting. Like I first saw it kind of when I watched the first Hillary Trump debate, and people kept saying Hillary won, but you know, most of those people were people who were pro Hillary who couldn't see it from the view of somebody who wasn't a metropolitan progressive. You know, they couldn't see it from outside themselves. So when I was watching it, I was like, okay, Trump has a story here. You know, like Trump has a story that Hillary, her husband, Obama, they just signed a bunch of NAFTA stuff and sent a bunch of jobs overseas, and they basically gutted American manufacturing. People don't have jobs anymore. These things are going to overseas sweatshops, and the fat cats are reaping the profits from the lowered margins, while the hardworking Americans, you know, can't eat and make America great and all this stuff. And yeah, he's blustering around like a buffoon, but there's a coherent story that he's telling. And then Hillary was just like, "Oh, Donald." Like, it's just gonna do that over and over again. She goes, "You can go to my website and check the policy." And it's like, okay, people don't want to hear, you can go do homework. Like you gotta have a counter story here. And I kept thinking, like, I don't think he really won that debate as much as you think. If I'm somebody who actually sees the world the way he just described it, as in, like, I used to have a lot of work, I don't have work. Uh, and I hear somebody list all these problems, and even whether he's right or wrong, whether he's scapegoating the right people or not or whatever, he's at least seeing my problem or my deep
He's at least
story.
saying,
Yeah.
yeah,
Whereas the other person just gaslighting and saying, no, like, are you gonna
you're
trust
stupid.
me or your lying eyes?
There's now I'm really going to date myself, but anybody remember Monty Python here, or is that just antiquated?
Of course.
There's a great old Python. I don't even remember what the skit was, but just in the middle of the skit, somebody says, the name of some obscure town, Islington on the Marsh, and the skit just stops cold. They cut to a row home, and a woman comes running out into the street and goes, "We've been mentioned on the telly," and then they go back to the skit. You're like, people just want to be recognized. I mean, the notion that, like, yeah, of course, there are people who listen to Trump and they believe him. There's people who listen to anybody and believe them. But the fact that he was just acknowledging, even in the most cynical, depraved way possible, that he was aware of their pain, he was aware of their circumstance, and that he shared their disdain for the people that they saw as being at least partially responsible. And then you go to the other side. Yeah, and as Trevor says, there's somebody going, no, you fucking idiot, you're wrong. The economy's great.
Yeah, and you're only saying that because you're a white supremacist.
Yeah, exactly.
If you
right.
say anything else.
Yeah, so I'm like, I gotta pick. If I buy into the notion that I have to pick one of these guys, I can see going over there. Sure, yeah, why not? You're just calling me an idiot. He's lying, but at least he's read something. He knows I exist.
Yeah, and there's, I think part of that is a willingness to be critical of your own party's mistakes in the past as well. So that's why, people persist in arguing about whether or not Trump is an outsider, especially since obviously he's been president before. But he positioned himself that way by being willing to criticize kind of Bush era Republicanism. And this is the point, that Matt Yglesias brings up in his piece from the end of last month called "Throw Biden Under the Bus," as a criticism too little too late of Joe Biden.
Yeah.
And when we
hey
get
guys,
into
maybe we should get him not to run again. What do you think?
But that Josh continues to be such a weird thing where I don't know what this is. I've spoken to a number of people and read a number of pieces at this point where there seems to be a consistent unwillingness for Democrats to say anything about the choice for Joe Biden to stay in as long as he did and to run. And so even those folks that are willing to sort of stick their necks out and say, yes, obviously mistakes were made. Obviously the party needs to be reformed. We just had this DNC chair race. We have a new guy. Let's see what happens with the new guy. I was reading in the New York Times piece, "We Have No Coherent Message. Democrats Struggle to Oppose Trump." Ken Martin said of the reflection on what went wrong and how to reform it. He said he planned to conduct a post-election review largely focused on tactics and messaging. Mr. Martin said he had not determined the parameters of the review other than that he was not interested in discussing whether former President Joseph R. Biden Jr. should have sought re-election. Seems like a pretty big hole.
Yeah.
It seems like like in some ways that's the whole kit and caboodle, because what's going to happen next time around if you have someone whose internal polling shows is going to lose by 400 electoral votes and who 2 years before election day polls were showing 80% of Democratic voters didn't want him to be the nominee.
Yep. Yeah, there is a thing too. I think this is some of it. It certainly is with how do you differentiate, like, Democratic voters? Certainly sort of like well-to-do base voters. If you ever read up or meet and talk to any confidence men, women as well, they will tell you that the easiest people to con are well-educated, well-to-do folks, because they are so invested in their own, intellectual superiority that they would rather double down and give you even more of their life savings than admit you hoodwinked them. And I think there's a lot of that going on. And it's so bizarre because, there's a lot of things to go back to the West Wing thing that we called that happened that we were lucky or we were clever. Dave, I will admit, I was on the fence as to whether or not Hillary was going to win in 2016. As it got closer, I became fairly sure she wouldn't, but I just wasn't sure. Dave was positive for months.
Really?
But for me,
wait, he was positive she wouldn't win.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I just had this whole thing towards the end was like, what am I going to do? I'm going to tell my friends that they're going to let them have these last few weeks, But we talked about this on the show a bunch of times, but Joe Biden, the entire party, Obama stepping in, the party coalescing around Biden, everybody dropping out. First and foremost, you're sitting there going, this is a really bad idea because even if it works, you're stuck with Biden. And then he goes off, and not only does he pick as his vice president a candidate who was so bad she had to drop out before the first primary, and I haven't heard anybody say this, and maybe it's I shouldn't because it's a third rail, so I'm hoping you'll protect me, Bree. But it seems to me that he hobbled her by going out and announcing up front that he was only going to be looking at black women.
Yes.
Oh, I didn't remember he did that.
All I'm going to say is if I'm him and I'm doing that, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to go, I don't care what anybody says, I'm going to pick the best candidate ever. Oh, look, it happens to be. Great. And now let all these people complain about DEI and all that shit. I'm like, yeah, fuck you. I went with the best candidate. He stated up front.
He did.
Well, one thing that was interesting was, he wasn't required to state this up front, but I guess he must have felt pressure.
He kind of was. Because remember, so much of this, I don't mean to be the Bernie broad who can't let it go, but so much of this, sorry, this is my literal job at the time. Everything that happened in 2020 was about Bernie. Even the stuff that wasn't directly about him. And so there was this whole media campaign to get everyone on the record on stuff that was supposed to make Bernie look bad, including, by the way, that questionnaire about transition surgery for prisoners that really got Kamala Harris dinged at the end of this last race. However you feel about the issue, that is not something that anybody would have gone on record on if they weren't trying to make Bernie Sanders, who historically has been not that interested in those cultural issues, stayed away from them, unwilling as he was at the time to say he was going to pick a black or female VP. He said, I'm going to pick the best VP, and maybe it's likely that they will be from one of those identity categories. But they tore him up over it. Bernie won't answer the question straight. And then here comes Biden, and now look.
Yeah. But you're sitting there watching all that happen, and you're like, you guys are going to lose in 24. You're just setting yourselves up to crash and burn. And that's the degree. And by the way, also, and this makes me crazy, we knew Biden was falling apart in 2020. I mean, it was just crystal clear.
Oh, but they were denying it the whole time. Yeah. It was
it was so nuts. I got exhausted, but I found that there's this great clip of Biden in 2016 that I must have posted 1,000 times in 2020, where it's him talking about, I'm sure you've seen this, Brie, where it's him talking about why Bernie's doing so well against Hillary.
If Bernie Sanders never said he was a democratic socialist, based on what he's saying, people wouldn't be calling him a democratic socialist. That's how he characterizes himself in sort of European terms, the democratic socialist parties in Europe.
But why is she having trouble?
Well, I think that Bernie is speaking to a yearning that is deep and real, and he has credibility on it. And that is the absolute enormous concentration of wealth in a small group of people, with the middle class now being able to be shown being left out. There used to be a basic bargain. If you contributed to the profitability of an enterprise, you got to share in the profit. That's been broken. Productivity's up, wages are stagnant.
Hillary's talking about that as well.
It's relatively new for Hillary to talk about that. Hillary's focus has been on other things up to now, and that's been Bernie's. No one questions Bernie's authenticity on those issues.
And they question hers, you think?
Well, I think they question everybody's who hasn't been talking about it all along. But I think she's come forward with some really, really thoughtful approaches to deal with the issue. But I just think, and look, everybody, it's the old thing. Everybody wants to be the favorite. No one wants to be the prohibitive favorite. Mm-hmm. And so it's an awful high bar for her to meet, that she was the absolute prohibitive favorite. I never thought she was a prohibitive favorite. I don't think she ever thought she was a prohibitive favorite. So I think it's everything's sort of coming down to earth, just settling in, but it's not over.
And it's some of the most lucid, straightforward political commentary you'll ever hear from a mainstream Democrat. He's just like, yeah, here's the problem. She's perceived this way, and he's doing this, and it's not her. Yeah, it's like nobody's interested in establishment politics. And I would post it primarily because no stutter.
Yeah.
I mean, he's just completely there. And it would be like, tell me this sounds like this guy. It was just the added attraction of the fact that he's also explaining why your last idiot lost.
Something I remembered. Sorry. There's something I remembered about Biden's situation. Why I think he probably felt pressure to say something, even though I agree with Josh. He should have just debuted her. Was like to reintroduce the context. He had just finished doing that stupid interview with Charlemagne where he said, if you don't vote for me and not Blackjack or whatever it is he said.
You ain't black.
Yeah. And everybody was going at him, and it was all day, all night. And then a bunch of black liberal women seized on the opportunity to emotionally blackmail him for representation. I don't know if you guys remember this. They did the Washington Post group op-ed. I think it was like Amanda Seals, what's her name? Brittany Packyetti, Sunny Hostin, and like one or two other people. I think Alicia Garza was one of them from Black Lives Matter founder. And they had this video and op-ed and this big PR campaign.
Oh, I
that's
see.
Like,
in the Washington Post, May 14th, 2020.
Yeah, and
Biden still needs black women. Here are the 3 things he needs to do.
Yeah, and they came out and did this big campaign about this is your chance to make it right, Biden. What you said and everything you've done. Mind you, none of these women were rocking with Biden before. They were all with Elizabeth Warren and Kamala Harris and other people. But once those people dropped out, they're like, okay, we have to find our way to get our hooks into Biden. Somehow we've been on the wrong horse, because at the time they were all people who clearly wanted to become DNC surrogates and get DNC insider positions. So they were all kind of scrambling to get the hooks into Biden somehow. So they're like, Biden, you got to get a black woman. And I remember after that op-ed came out and the video came out, that's when the critical mass happened. At the time, he was actually courting Amy Klobuchar and flying her down. And that's when everyone thought Amy Klobuchar was going to win. And when the vice presidential nomination, not the nomination, of course. And I remember all of a sudden she stopped being flown down. You stopped hearing about her. And, I think they even said explicitly, like, we heard you're thinking about Amy Klobuchar, that'll be insult to black women. So the combination of the Charlemagne faux pas and then the op-ed and the virality of it, and, Amy Klobuchar was already kind of had negative connotations as this kind of demonic Karen, to her staff and everything. And I think all that kind of pressured him to just say, hey, guess what, guys? I'm going to get a black woman. Just be quiet now. I think that might have maybe made him announce.
We should also just know that I think that it contributed. There was definitely a firestorm around this issue, and that op-ed didn't hurt or didn't help.
By the way, I still agree with the Bernie thing. I'm not saying that's a contradiction to your Bernie point.
There's something else, though. With respect to Amy Klobuchar, I actually don't think Democrats give a shit about black people and care about those kind of pressure campaigns, because black people specifically are always going to vote for Democrats. So the way that a black woman asking for something from the Democratic Party means less than the dog crap on the bottom of my sneaker cannot be emphasized enough. Like, black women, there's no planet. If I were running for president, truly the last, apart from like having my own values, the way that the last call that I would answer would have to be a black woman's call, as long as they insist on voting hook, line, and sinker for Democrats no matter what. That's just the way leverage works, and I wish they wouldn't do that.
I definitely
black
agree.
women, I wish you wouldn't do that.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
To be listened to.
I do think the Charlemagne thing gave them a little bit more leverage than usual, because he was looking for anything to get him out of that.
Well, I think that the thing with Amy Klobuchar, why she went down, and then Kamala Harris was just like, who's left, was because, remember, the story came out, it looks like May 29th, just a few days after the Washington Post Black Women Ask, about Amy Klobuchar not charging Derek Chauvin for an earlier police violence issue, misconduct
Absolutely
issue.
Right. I totally forgot about that.
Like a decade before. And remember, this was like Black Lives Matter was happening. Like it was all happening right then. And so there was sensitivity around that.
Good memory.
Implicates, again, not just, I had just been fired. No, the campaign had just ended. But I was still very much in work mode. Like this was my job. And then it wasn't my job. And then I didn't have a job. And so all I did was follow this stuff. So
it wasn't her terrible joke about the blizzard that. Remember that when she would tell the same joke over and over and over. Yeah, it kind of is, I guess.
Well, they might be trying to bring her back. I don't know if you've seen this. The 2028 speculation will make you want to get yourself a samurai sword. Okay, let's focus up and get a little bit into this weird cycle of democratic denialism, and also backed up by the sort of revisionist history from the Matt Yglesias of the world. I can't remember which of you forwarded along this throw Biden under the bus article that he wrote, in which he seems to be willing to admit all that the left has been saying since time immemorial without actually genuinely acknowledging why he was wrong. Who wants to take a first crack at this bad boy?
I'll let Josh do it because I didn't actually read the article. I just read quotes from it. People sent me excerpts.
Yeah, me too, to be honest. I can only take so much of that guy, and I'm genuinely baffled by the way that people like him or your Jonathan Chait. I mean, there's so many of these guys who are just dumb as posts, who are making a staggering amount of money just writing nothing. I mean, like, and then coming out with stuff like this when it's way too late to do anything about, to mean anything. And it's not like he or any of these people are using this realization they've just come to argue that we need to really change things. It's just like, well, I guess we were wrong about that one. Oh well, stay the course. And I keep going back. You did a piece, I think, last week on that Vanity Fair article about Chapo. Mm-hmm. Which, by the way, shout out to the writer. I love that guy. He made me an Oscar-winning screenwriter. So, as opposed to just nominated. So he's friend for life. But he, there's a line, Will Menaker said, really simple. I'm like, that's pretty much it right here. I'm not giving any campaign advice here other than to believe different things. Mm-hmm. Like, absent any kind of belief, any kind of actual system, whether or not it's like Trump's, which is what, make myself rich and God knows what else. At least he's got a worldview, There's no world for you here. And I don't know what people like Matt Yglesias actually believe, except that I must support the party and they must keep paying me. I got to tell them what they want to hear.
Yeah. So, okay, let me just read a little excerpt of it then. This is starting with the third paragraph. Of course, many good people served in the Biden administration. Wouldn't be a liberal think piece unless there was a lot of throat clearing before we got into our criticism. And the administration did.
Name two.
And the administration did a number of admirable things. But on a fundamental level, Biden defined his entire post-2016 political comeback in terms of averting the Trumpian threat to American political institutions. And he failed catastrophically. It's not just that Trump won, it's that he has returned more powerful than before. It's that we are genuinely much worse off than we would have been if Trump were narrowly reelected in 2020. It's that Biden alienated an entire cohort of young people, along with many of the leaders of the most important companies in America. Okay. I would just like to say on the record that some of us were called everything but a child of God, an accelerationist, an evil person who didn't care about all those that were going to be vulnerable under Trump, for suggesting that vote blue no matter who wasn't a good strategy back in 2020. And now, of all people, Matt Yglesias is basically validating the premise of my much maligned Noam Chomsky debate. Saying, I've never even gone this far, by the way, but he's going as far as to say we would have been better off if Trump won in 2020.
The worst thing is, if they have a chance to do it over again, 4 years, the same position, they're gonna do the same thing again. That's the worst thing about them. No matter how many epiphanies they have right after the moment. Because I remember when Bernie first lost in 2016, there were so many people who were like, I was wrong. Maybe Bernie would have won. Maybe I did everything wrong, and then they would turn right back into shit libs in 4 years. It's kind of semi nice to see, but I don't trust them to stick to. They seem to only be able to see things in hindsight. It can't stick ever.
Yeah, the next section of his article is subheaded "A Brand in Crisis," and that feels like it's actually a description of his own personal issue, that his brand is in crisis, not the Democratic Party's brand, because he tied himself so closely to it. One of you guys sent around an example of how much he was manufacturing consent for Biden in the senility point, like is he cognitively or physically fit to run for office. Did you guys have that? Which one of you
I sent a quote that said, they, which means his handlers, they lied to the public, not convincingly enough to persuade most Americans. Well, they persuaded you, though, because you were covering for him so hard, but convincingly enough to persuade most Democrats. And the process made their friends and supporters look ridiculous. And first off, I have no sympathy for anybody that ignored the evidence of their eyes and ears and listened to somebody say, no, don't mind the guy talking to nobody on the podium, like who's facing literally nobody, or who's like trying to shake hands with air, like they had all these crazy stories. Like, no, there was someone out of camera sight, out of the camera line that you can't see, that was waving at him, and people who were there were like, oh no, there wasn't. And it goes, well, that person's just a right winger. Don't listen to, like,
calling Kamala Trump.
Yeah, all types of crazy things that he was doing, facing the wrong way during speeches, and someone has to come out and turn him around and all this stuff. But the other thing is, okay, even if you're going to say most Democrats fell for this or average person, like, what are you getting paid for? What do you make the big money for? Like, why do you have that huge Substack following for? It's because supposedly you're the expert, you're the pundit. Are you saying that you basically just listen to whatever the president's handlers tell you, and you're like, well,
right,
that's my job. That's my journalistic investigation.
And not his literal eyes. I mean, here's the bit in the piece where he talks about his cognitive fitness. Most people believed Biden was too old for the job and shouldn't have been running for re-election before he face planted at the debate. Yes, most people did. That's correct. Some of us kept faith until that moment. I know a lot of people refused. Yeah.
Why are you keeping faith? In faith in what? It's like I'm watching this happen. That's insane. I got faith that what I just saw happen didn't happen.
Yes.
And one of the things, I want to, because it made me crazy during that whole conversation where they kept trying, and I would argue that the Democrats won this one because I just heard you do it, and everybody made the conversation about, well, Biden's too old. That was never the fucking issue. It's like, yeah, there's a gerontocracy that decided. The issue is not that he's too old. There are people his age. In fact, I would talk to my father on a weekly basis, at least during that election, who was the same age as Biden, or actually a couple of years older. And we would talk about how not lucid Biden was.
That's right.
And my dad was lucid.
Bernie Sanders.
It wasn't about to be. Bernie Sanders was perfectly lucid. And they kept trying to do that. Oh, well, if he's too old, how come she's not too old? You're like, well, because she doesn't need, to go to bed at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It's just
100%.
Yeah, here's here's a tweet from Maddie in September. One of the main things he retweets a Benny Johnson tweet where Biden made a very tiny, it's like he made a comment and he said something about, I marched a lot of UAW picket lines when I was a senator. I tell you what, first time I've ever done it in person. And, if you listen to the video, it sounds like you can't tell he said person or president. Who gives a shit? That's hardly and Maddie's like, one of the main things you need to know about Joe Biden's mental acuity is that the people pushing the narrative that he's lost it often feel the need to make things up in order to support that narrative. Not often.
Hey YouTube, thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you, and as always, keep the faith.